Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome everyone on this lovely Friday. Welcome to this new series from the Sales Enablement Collective called Let's Talk Enablement. So we're kicking off series 2 today, and this will be the first of the series, and then we're going to have a couple of sessions over the next few months. We're really excited today because this session is really all about designing the strategy. What are the things to look for? What are the things to make sure that are included? And I'm really thrilled to pieces to be here with my two esteemed colleagues right now. And we also want to make sure that we're reminded for you all that this is an interactive session. And we really want to make sure that if you have questions or you have issues, things that you want to ask us, put it into the chat and we will, of course, make sure that those are answered appropriately. So why don't we start right now with just a kickoff? Oh, I love seeing all these, New York City and London and North Carolina. For those that are in the Northeast, Alex, Renee, and myself, we are all getting ready for anywhere between 7 inches of snow and 2 feet of snow. So for Nick in Dallas and some other people that I'm seeing from the South, you can just listen or look at the weather forecast over the next 48 hours and just see us inundated with snow. So we're really pretty excited about that. At least my 10-year-old is excited. I'm not so sure. So let's go through and introduce the panel right now. So Renee, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Renee Gellatly. I'm more often in New York City, but I'm on a week holiday in Cape Cod. So hi to Alex. We'll be just south of you, bracing for whatever is coming. I work for a company called Link. We're a network platform as a service for expert networks and knowledge management. We have about 300 people on our team. It's a global, really diverse team. So running our global enablement is really fun. It's challenging, as well as bringing the program to life. So I think, I have a long history of consulting. So experience both kind of being on the outside, helping to better understand and deliver strategy, as well as, working directly with companies. So really looking forward to this series.
Great. Fantastic. All right, Nick, how about you?
Sure. Welcome, everybody. Great to partner with the both of you and then, of course, engaging with our attendees today. Nicholas Gregory, living here in Dallas, Texas. So as you mentioned, Susan, not going to go through all the snow, but hopefully it's you all enjoy that there. I started my career in sales about 14 years ago, and then a short time after that, pivoted into what we call sales enablement, and have been in this exciting, fascinating, and rewarding discipline ever since then in regional enablement roles as well as global enablement leadership roles throughout my career. And so I'm looking forward to not only learning from both of you and our attendees, but also showing what has been some of the keys to my success and my team's success at the variety of organizations I've supported over my career.
Fantastic. Great. And I am Susan Savona. Let's see, have been in enablement, operations, tools, go-to-market strategy for, oh gosh, every time I say the number of years, it makes me feel a little bit older, but a little over 20 years. And, when I started talking about enablement, it was called sales training. There was a whole bunch of other words that were used to describe it. So really have just a love of learning and a love of education. So I'm really excited to join these great forums. I'm with you, Nick. I learn something new every single day from folks. And it's always great to be able to have a kind of dialogue, and because our industry seems to be changing every day. We're calling it new words, new phrases, things of that nature. So I'm really, really excited to be joining this with you. And as I said, I'm a big proponent of conversation. So while we do have some questions coming in, please make sure that those are there. We want to end this week on a positive note and make sure that all of your questions and comments are answered. So really the first question, and again, I kind of alluded to it, is really around how do you define enablement? different words, different phrases, things of that nature. So Nick, let's start with you. What is your definition of sales enablement?
Sure. Yeah, and they're probably, I guess, to start out, you put 10 practitioners, leaders of sales enablement, ask 10 of them that question, you might get 12, 13 different answers, right? So, but I'll simplify what definition that I align to. So I feel that sales enablement is a strategic and collaborative discipline designed to increase predictable sales results by providing consistent, scalable enablement services, which can be different across different companies, of course, that allow customer-facing professionals and their leaders, the critical audience, their leaders, those critical first line and second line sales leaders, et cetera, to add value in every customer engagement along the customer journey. So that is maybe a little bit wordy or what have you, but that's a definition that I align to. And when I do go into a discussion talking about that definition, I do like to break it apart in its different sections, because while it could be seen as a lot there, it's very important to define what each of those elements are, like supporting first line leaders, supporting the end-to-end buyer's journey, and who on our side, our internal customers, how they support the buying side in a variety of different capacities, whether it's in that first engagement from a SDR, BDR, all the way to customer success and everything in between. So I like to pull it apart and define the definition piece by piece.
Fantastic. Renee, anything to add on that one?
Oh, I'd agree, from what Nick said, is that, from a strategy perspective, based on the company and the company goals and objectives, it can take on a lot of different variations, and to kind of think about it as, the team, or, the individuals that are kind of that all seeing, right? Thinking about it from the customer perspective, thinking about it from the executive goals and objectives. How's the market doing? What are we putting in for our yearly objectives? How did the teams go to market? What tools do they use? And really being able to take that big step back and understand how they all work together, and then to be able to think about where the areas are for the first priority enablement. Is it that the teams just need to get aligned to understand that they have to work together to facilitate that? Is it thinking more about the tools and the technology? CRMs, where's that right insight? How do you get relevant and personal if you're an SDR, or if you're trying to close the deal and you're bringing on new team members, so that you're not having to, re-articulate questions that the customer has already answered? Or if it's marketing teams, content development, that they really understand the different market segmentations. So yeah, it's a lot. And as Nick mentioned, it can get complex really quick. So being able to think about all the different areas, right? If it's 3 pillars, that the people, the processes, and all the platforms, and how you actually put them all together and help all the various team members align to that and optimize it.
Yep. Which is fantastic. That's why one of the things that I love about enablement, and specifically within the sales enablement, and I like to do it as, again, a succinct, sales enablement to me is really all about making sure that the sales organization, complete end to end, has the tools, processes, programs, things that they need in order to be successful. And it's really, if we all have that as a lens, then there's lots of different ways to ensure that those things happen. But it's really around making sure that the sales organization has what they need. And what's really great is just, again, Nick and Renee, based on what you said, we're going to pull out basically some of those questions and information of, okay, that's great, that's the definition, but how do we know where to start, and whether I'm an existing team or not, or what is that? So I guess the next question that really comes in is around, what should be included, or what should we be thinking about in terms of creating or defining an enablement strategy? Because it can mean different things to different companies and different sizes and things of that nature. So, again, based on your experience, what are some of the things that should be included? So Renee, why don't we start with you on this one?
I was going to say, wow, based on what we just said, everything, right? It's, what do they say? Everything, in the kitchen sink. But I think what's really important is to recognize it needs to be prioritized. So you can think about, if enablement is just being set up, or if it's been running for a while, but there's questions on measurement and impact and where we really can, be able to deliver on what's being asked of us. And so if you think about all those different pillars, what do you know about the company? What do you know about gaps or bumpy processes or, pain points because you've reached thresholds or you've gone beyond them and it's having too much of an impact on the front line's ability to engage and find, capture, qualify, right, and maintain that revenue stream, like we said, end to end. And again, so much goes on within that end-to-end journey that being able to think about all of those elements and just quickly map them all out. You don't have to have the processes done yet, right? But just say, hey, these are all the components. And then to be able to think about where you'll be able to have the greatest impact and start there, right? So again, it's going to be different for everybody because your organizations are different, your companies are different, how you engage with your customers, if you're a global organization or a tiny little, team of 3, whatever it might be. But yeah, I think thinking about it first before you sort of dive in is really going to be key.
Great. Fantastic. I was going to say, Nick, I'll throw this over to you for anything to add on that one.
Sure. Yeah. And great comments mentioned already. I think if we think of possibly some of you that are attending the panel right now, maybe you're interviewing for an enablement role, rather thinking maybe a leadership role or individual contributor, regardless, asking the question, do you have a current enablement strategy? And if so, can we describe what that looks like? So if you're interviewing, whether again, leader or a team member, what the current state of the organization is, how supportive is the organization or that enablement leader of having a true strategy, or are they more just on the receiving end of we need to tackle these tactical things and it's not very perceived as a strategic discipline within the organization? So qualifying current state of the organization you might be interviewing with is critically important, whether again, interviewing for a leadership role or a team member. Now, being a part of the enablement team or leading the enablement team, current state as already being with an organization, starting, if you don't have a strategy in place, even a light strategy in place, documented, communicated, socialized, getting that buy-in, and we might talk about charter later, now is the time to do so, because as we can really separate you from the pack or the team from the pack, because you're actually putting that strategy in place aligned to the strategic imperatives of the organization, as well as the sales strategy itself. So just having one, even a light one, is critically important.
Yep.
What would be included is, again, talking about the imperatives of the organization. Do you have that documented? What are you tying that connective tissue to when you're talking about what you do in enablement? So it should be aligned, in my opinion, to the strategic imperatives of the org, as well as the sales strategy itself.
Yep.
Number 2 is thinking about who you do support, that was already mentioned previously, is again, end to end, or full revenue stream from BDR, SDR, all the way to customer success. Do you support the technical organization if you're in a technical company? So the pre-sales engineers or the solution architects and things of that nature. So there's those pieces of who you support as well. And then we talked about, Susan, you teed up the conversation with this, is how do you define enablement? So you have who you support, what you do for a living within, how you align to the imperatives of the organization and sales strategy. Put that definition, whatever that might mean to you in the organization, but make sure you communicate that. One thing I'll mention about enablement strategy is especially when I'm newer to an org, I like to have a walking deck of sorts, and that's slide number 2, right after the title slide, is that definition, and again, the one I gave earlier, but also our how, what, and why. So just one slide that defines what we do for a living. But I do that after doing some discovery. I just don't walk in doing that, but I make sure that it aligns to the organization, of course. But small tweaks here and there. But that's slide number 2, if you will. So we can get into potentially some other elements through a charter, but those are just some things top of mind, high level.
Yep. No, and that's great. And the only thing that I would add, and again, regardless of where you're at, in whether you're a part of enablement, joining enablement, whatever, but I think to your point, both of your points, the strategy is super important because sales enablement, as we talked about, and we're seeing some comments coming through, can mean so many different things to so many different parts of the organization. And unless you really think about what that strategy is, so who do you support and how much and where do you start and where do you end, what can happen, and I've been in organizations, unfortunately, where enablement just becomes you're the group that's just going to go do things. Like, you're just the group that's going to go execute. You're just going to go do whatever it is that I'm asking you to do. And sometimes that's perfectly fine. But if we don't align from a strategic perspective, then we become the fixer of things, as opposed to the team that can really help the sales organization perform better, be more productive, and help the business with its kind of business issues. And so one of the other kind of questions that came up, and I think that it's really good, is really around org structure, which I think is fascinating. Because again, I have been in big organizations, small organizations. Enablement has gone to 15 different kind of places. So in terms of like org structure, I guess, Nick, I'll start with you on this one. Are there recommendations that you have, and have Renee come in there as well, if you're talking about customer success or client success, you're talking about partners, you're talking about all of these different groups, what are some of those recommendations that you might have on, is it all together? Is it separate? What does it look like? So I'll punt this over, Nick, for you to start, and then we can add and chime in.
Sure. Yeah. So as far as structure is concerned, one of those things is, are you joining or are you part of an established team? Or are you interviewing, right? So, two different audiences. I would say from existing audiences are, going into now, as a lot of companies are, into fiscal 23 or starting out fiscal 22 right now this month, is to think about back to what you mentioned before, Susan, as well as Renee, is the strategy of the organization. Are you well prepared to support maybe the changes going on in the organization from a GTM perspective, go-to-market perspective? Are you right-sized, as well as having the right org to support the imperatives of the organization? Do you need to pivot certain roles that you already have existing to align to that? So while you may have, let's say you're taking on partner enablement as an example, or you're building out a partner ecosystem within your organization, or expanding upon it, or going into market with partners, you need some support behind that. So maybe taking what could be a program manager or sales coach role and dividing that into maybe two individuals, if you can hire someone, or someone that plays in both, supporting the internal sales organization, but now also your partner account management team or channel account management team, or even externally your external channel partners, et cetera. So don't keep things just status quo as what it was last year. It means it's going to be the same this year. Really take stock of what is the strategy of organization and back into it, underpin it with your team. And it's not that you can just go on a hiring spree per se, but who do you currently have that can support the strategy, and what pivots need to take place there? And don't forget about the all-important KPIs. What are you measuring across the organization, and what your team's impact will be? And not to solve for that or discuss that right now, but those have to be aligned. How is your team, from a headcount perspective, supporting the sales strategy, supporting the go-to-market and the org strategy? But also, what are you measuring? Now we can support it, but what are we measuring? What's our true north? What levers are we moving there? So there's not a right model for any organization. But at the end of the day, you have your guiding principles, and that's the sales and the org strategy to help show you the way, if you will, on your respective org.
Correct. Exactly. I don't know, Renee, if you have some things to add.
Well, I would just say, reading through Alexander's, question, comment, in semantics, in thinking, again, as you mentioned, Susan, having been doing this for decades, remembering very early on when marketing and sales teams really never spoke. We never really thought about how we understood the customer and the go-to-market strategy, and did we align on that? For so long it was, well, lead generation happens over here, demand generation, throw it over the fence, and there you go. We've got customers and we're dealing with them. And there was a lot of siloed organizational structures that, I think, morphed and is continuing to morph, as Nick was pointing out, right? And then Dell just commented, is it sales enablement? Well, I call it revenue enablement. And so much of it, again, I think is just, potentially semantics. If you need to call it something, great. But if you think about being able to understand the organization and scale, how many are in each team? Do you need to have, enablement its own function that has dotted lines into each of the core respective teams? Or do each of the teams have their own enablement teams, and then there's a dotted line so that they form a committee, right? Or cohorts? Visibility into the overarching organizational structure is where I really think is key, right? So that you are continuing to grow away from those silos, so that you can bridge those conversations within the organization, as well as continue to understand the different needs and experiences of the customer and integrate that back in, and be able to measure it. Is it you want to have the teams able to actually bring in revenue faster? What's going to impact that? Can you measure that? How are they going to get to know that voice of the customer? Is there a customer team, right? So again, depending on the way the organization, the company does business, is it strategy? Is it, the organization is just infiltrate and penetrate as much as you possibly can and continue to bring in that information in real time, right? It's not just a one and done. Oh, we got this a couple of years ago. Here's our strategy. I mean, we all know from the past 2 years, everything has changed, and we've had to understand and adapt in real time. So, but I like the evolution of it, right?
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
No, both of us were like, yeah, let's piggy. Totally, totally.
We're all such geeks on this.
It's really fun. But I agree with you completely, and I know that there's in some respects it doesn't fully matter. One of the key things for me is making sure that there is an alignment. So if you do have separation of pre-sales enablement, customer education enablement, sales enablement, if you have them different, it's really super important. And again, going back to the strategy, to use that as, well, where do you start and where do you end? And how do we make sure? I love the idea, and I've done that in other companies around cohorts, because in some respects, it doesn't matter if it's siloed, if it's all together. The key piece is making sure that all of those organizations and all of those people are talking to each other to make sure that the education that's going out to customers once they've purchased a solution is the same education that the sales organization is getting. It's the same as what the product marketing organization might be putting together. So it's really about that level kind of communication. And Dell, I know that you're kind of piggybacking on some of this, and I want to get some insight again from Nick and Renee as well, is it does help to educate stakeholders. But again, that's where I think it's super important to have conversations at a strategic level of, well, what do you expect enablement to be? What are your key KPIs? What are the business issues that you're trying to solve? I think that, again, my personal opinion is key, that you really need to think about enablement, sales enablement, revenue enablement, pick a title, it doesn't matter. You're about solving business issues. And if you can really land there, regardless of kind of where it sits, then you're 4 steps ahead of the game. So Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, well, 2 things. I'll start what you just said, Susan, around the questions are just like in sales, right? It's about going in and doing the right level of discovery. That is not an event. It's not one meeting. It's not 30 minutes. It's not a stage. Discovery in a sales cycle, engaging with the buying side is throughout the entirety of that buying/sales cycle. Just the same internally with Enable. So it's about the questions as much as it is about the solution. So asking the right questions, always getting that buy-in. Taking 2 things, one that you said, Renee, and one that you said, Susan, about the cohort, so critically important. About Susan, you said about enablement can be perceived, ever since I've been in enablement, of the land of broken things, and how do you write that definition and the charter, the strategy can help write that, because you kind of, this is our sandbox we're playing in. And then what you said, Renee, about the cohort, that is something that, I'm a big believer in, is that everyone has a responsibility to support the organization
Correct.
through enablement services. It's not just one team, one person, depending on the size of your company. It's everybody's responsible for empowering, enabling, and improving the results of the organization, supporting the sales strategy. So it doesn't matter if you're in HR, marketing, product development, sales leadership themselves. You cannot contract out to the enablement team your coaching responsibilities as a first line or second line leader. We can help, we can support, because coaching should be done by not only just the sales manager, but you can't contract out some of these responsibilities from marketing to enablement, or HR to enablement, or product development, or sales themselves, or sales ops. We're all in this together. We can just be that orchestration of how to go into and supporting that organization, and bring some organization, if you will, and process and methodology and framework behind supporting the organization, because all these other teams, to what you all were saying, sometimes don't talk to each other, don't talk very well to each other, don't even get along very well. But you know what? We can be that peacemaker, if you will, and bring some sense to the fast pace of change and the complexity of running an organization in 2022.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's, I think that those types of things are critical. And again, it's really, you have to think about that from a strategy perspective, because again, I look at enablement, and we've talked about it here, as that kind of facilitator. But again, you've got to be really careful and thinking about the strategy and talking to the right people so that it doesn't appear to be a bottleneck. We are not the gatekeepers. My opinion, we are not the gatekeepers. We are the facilitators to really help ensure that the organizations have what they need in order to solve their business goals. So again, I think it's great points on really thinking about that from a strategic perspective. So kind of piggybacking a little bit on that, from your perspective, who needs to be bought into the strategy? How often should it be updated? And is that executive, sales, strategy? Like, who needs to kind of get bought in on all of this? So I don't know, Renee, if you want to start us off on that one.
Everyone, I would say. And I think, one of the comments Del made as well is, from a stakeholder perspective, how do we educate our stakeholders? I think, everyone needs to be bought in, because from an enablement, we need alignment and information from everybody, right? The core teams, and especially the executives, as they are, thinking about the company structure, growth, so that we not only come up with our strategy, our purpose, our measurements and impact as it relates to the company and the respective teams, but within there, we also have demands, right? We need information. So we need to be able to understand their processes, how we work to get that information, how we intake it, how we leverage it, how we work to keep the various teams, if it's sales and they're really wanting to get, a new product is coming, competitive differentiation, whatever it might be, we can't just develop it in a silo and build up playbooks and training materials. That needs to have impact across the board. And so, I think from how we all work it together in a strategy perspective, it was just something, again, of how do we educate about our purpose? But I do think, who needs to be involved? One of the first comments, when I said, I really think of enablement, especially just my own role and my own personality, is I've always kind of been on the fence, right? In the middle of, I'm not marketing, I'm not sales. I've really all thought about it from the big picture. And so, I think it is that critical mindset that enablement has to bring to the organization. Nick highlighted it. We are the facilitators, right? We are bridging those conversations. We are creating the avenues so that, teams that might not have had conversations now have not only a conversation, but impact and input, because we are bringing them all together, because we're going to paint that big picture. And so we're going to need their input constantly. Another thing I was thinking of, and then I'll toss it over to Nick, was, from how long do we update it, right? And he had said, his slide 2, we have our, our goals, our objectives, our purpose. This is what we're doing. Maybe here's our 3-year roadmap. Here's what we're doing this first year, this quarter. but it is agile, right? It needs to be flexible. But I think that's the way, at least for me, quarterly, updates, monthly, all hands, I have a slide deck. This is what here's my slide. This is what we're doing. Here's our impact. Here's where we need help, so that it is visible across the entire organization, which gives you responsibility, visibility, but also, the validity that it's a component of the organization that has a stake in the game. And it's not just a peripheral, oh yeah, but that's enablement, right? You own how the company is going forward, and you're being put to the task to demonstrate that and own up to it, month over month. So yeah, it is, again, to my long-winded answer to your many years ago question. Everyone needs to be involved.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Spot on, Renee. To add to that, I've recently in November joined just an amazing organization called Couchbase to lead sales enablement for them. And I'm just, as Renee was talking, reflecting back of, day one and week one, week two, et cetera, about, the process I just went through that I typically go through and want to, any organization that I join, being the new guy, is everyone has a responsibility for enablement, as we talked about, but also we need to continually get that buy-in. And so I was just reflecting on starting that process just a few months ago, and fortunate that we're in sales kickoff planning mode, and that helped accelerate and facilitate that, because I was going out, still am going out and meeting new people and driving some partnerships, but all at the same time getting the buy-in that you all were just talking about. So of course, your immediate leader has to have that buy-in and support and have your back, provide that air cover. That is, a daily or weekly process, of course, but, product development, product marketing, HR, sales ops, FP or finance, the sales leaders across the organization as well. There has to be a continuous process of that buy-in. That in itself, not an event. It's not just the one meeting of, I've done some, just a month of discovery, and now here's our enablement plan, and it's now thrown into a drawer and never to be, dusted off again throughout the year until next year.
Right.
Or the case may be, it's an iterative process. As the business change, the sales strategy change, so does our priorities. It fluctuates. What may not be a priority right now, maybe a priority 3 months from now, as we would be, increasing hiring and building out an SDR function in Europe, right? Well, priorities are going to change. We got to support that, a sunk cost of investment right now, but to support that, so then has longer term gains moving forward. But I'll just summarize: an ongoing process that doesn't stop. You got to always be positioning the planning, or position the plan, iterating on the plan, getting buy-in on the plan. So that's an ongoing process in of itself. But you got to always be, you touched on it, Renee, can't be done in a vacuum. Anything that we do has to have buy-in in some facet. It could be quick, just with your immediate manager, they put the executive approval, done. That could be one way. The other way, obviously, is shaking hands and kissing babies across the organization.
Exactly. I was going to say, Nick, all of the positions that I've had, and when I started at Monster 4 years ago, and when I'm starting a new opportunity in a couple of weeks, it's really, you got to spend a lot of time having conversations. You have to have a lot of time thinking about, well, what do you think enablement is, and what is it that you do, and what that are your priorities? And to piggyback on both of your comments, it needs to be an across the board. Sales leaders, key leaders of different functions. So if customer service and customer enablement has their own organization, great. You need to have those conversations of, well, how do we work together? And how often do we need to meet? And what are those expectations? And who's doing what? So spending a lot of time talking and listening will really help you think about, well, what is that strategy, and what might need to change, and things of that nature. I am a firm believer in really getting, lots of information. And then I've always been a huge proponent of quarterly reviews. And maybe that's just, years of being in operations and doing enough QBRs to it's a lot of them. and really is what's working, what's not working, what priorities have changed, what has shifted. Because I completely agree, Nick, with it's an iterative process. It's not a yearly process. And I even did that with my team, which is on a quarter over quarter basis. The beginning of a quarter, you go through and here's what our strategy is, here's what our programs are, here's what we're hearing, here's what's going on. And then every month, it's like, oh, have those changed? Does something pop up? Does something need to get moved down? Geez, this new thing came. It is just that continuation. But really having those conversations and having lots of kind of connection points and check-ins is super, super critical. So what happens, I guess, on the flip of that, we've all been there too, when you run into huge challenges where, Nick, maybe to your point, you've started a new role and you're like, yes, I'm so excited about the strategy. And you go talk to someone and they're like, oh no, that's no. So like what happens when you do run into those challenges? If you're getting friction, what are some tips and tricks that you guys have to resolve some of those?
Yeah, I'd go back to maybe a comment I made, or I think they made this earlier around us thinking of this as a internal sales role. So I'm thinking about my sales days, and then just what we teach, let's say, on a daily basis of world-class sales best practices itself is what's in it for that individual. So if there is some friction, going back to personal wins in general. So if there is some lack of support, lack of response from certain individuals or certain team. In itself is to really get in, have that EQ side of really getting down to how are they measured, what's in it for them on what projects they're working on, why wouldn't they potentially not, you're not asking why wouldn't they support you or anything like that, but get down to that level of detail, understanding what worked in the past. If you're brand new to the organization, what worked well in the past, or where were there some friction points so you can overcome that could just have some blocker of, well, we've tried to support enablement in the past. It hasn't gone well for us. Politically, it's really hurt us in some capacity. So we just, we stay in our silo, our swim lane, and do things this way to support enablement, but we don't really engage on an ongoing basis. So overcoming that through just the question asking that you said, Susan, to uncover how can there be some common footing potentially where there's a win-win outcome between enablement and whatever the other team might be it ops or marketing or whatever the case may be. So understanding at a human level of what's in it for them, what's the personal win, can really overcome a lot of things. I would say one other point here, number two, would be that in enablement we come loaded with templates and frameworks and processes and things of that nature that we've iterated on or purchased through IP over the years in our career. And so, within an organization, we can also say, okay, I have found this to be successful in the past, doing this way, entertaining this way. Does this resonate with you? Do you feel like we could have mutual success? Thinking about this different, solving the same problem, this personal win we can both align on, but doing it this way. Do you think this would simplify, accelerate our time to market, if you will, if we templatize this or make it a process to operationalize whatever it is that we're doing? Now,
Is Nick frozen for you too, Renee?
Yes, there he goes.
There he's back.
And he's gone again.
Now he's back.
Sorry, back. Yeah, but I'll stop there. It sounded like there was a little glitch on my side.
All right. No, Renee, anything to add on that one?
Well, I had a couple of different thoughts, and I think as as we've been prepping for this and having conversations as well as just thinking about it, what are the goals of enablement? What does it mean to be an enablement? And as we mentioned, it's loaded, right? It's everything and everywhere, and the expectations can be overwhelming, right? Because you think, oh, we've got enablement now, we're going to get better revenue, we're going to get better trained teams, everything is just going to be perfect, right? Like, yeah, but enablement actually isn't responsible for all of it. And you think of that end-to-end journey, and there are so many different components of it that impact it. And we can help influence and bring light to problems that can be solved, or processes and frameworks that are going to help teams do things better, technology work better based on how we do business and how we want to measure things. But at the end of the day, those complexities, especially if throughout the organization, there is the expectation that enablement is going to solve for everything.
Correct.
Right. And so that, I think to the question is, well, what happens when we get stuck? I think, overarching, we have to be able to understand from those first processes we talked about of having that map and understanding where it works well, where it doesn't, what the expectation is for optimization, and having those tough conversations about the ability to help influence and optimize.
Correct.
But also within that, being able to, when they don't like it, and I've been there too many times, which is unfortunate, but people don't like change, right? Why should I change, Renee? Everything is just fine, right? And that argument of, yeah, but this is the way we should be doing it. One of the biggest challenges I faced is moving from the product centric to customer centric. Enforcing that change in organizations, and people who've been around time like we have, and are like, but this is the way I do it. This is the way I think. And they don't want to be forced to think differently. They don't want to be forced to think about a new technology or a new way of customer engagement. And sometimes you have to sort of say, okay, you're a roadblock, and I'm going to take a couple people, we're going to run a little project, and we're going to run it this way on our own in our silo, and we're going to bring back measurable results and then present it back to say, okay, well, here was just a little trial we did. Here were the results. If you like it, great. If not, you're just going to have to be like, okay, I've got brick walls. But then again, knowing on your map, you can say, I need this to happen. And if teams or individuals are giving you the roadblock, that's all you have to do is present it back of, look, I've gone this far and now I'm stuck. And here's why I'm stuck. And in order to really push it forward, here's what we need to bulldoze through. So
Correct.
At least, again, it's your awareness of what's being sticky and your recommendations for the strategy of how to get beyond it and what you think that impact will be, that kind of allow you to help move the organization forward.
Correct.
And if it needs to, like, you can have the tough conversations, right?
Correct.
But it's all based on the overarching objectives.
Correct. Exactly. And it's interesting because we've got some kind of questions when you're talking about, well, who needs the buy-in and things of that nature.
Yeah.
And there's a great question, and Nick did a little response. I'd love to kind of piggyback on that one, is really around org structure.
Yeah.
Like, where does it sit? From experience, at least where I've sat, I really believe in order to have it be strategic, you want someone at the CCO level, operations level. You want someone there. I've been in organizations where it's rolled under a sales leader. Personally, I would caution against that because that can really force the group into a very narrow lens of just what I need. And if you're aligned to the US sales leader and it's a global organization, then it just makes it that much harder. In my experience, at least for me personally, I've had more success in a global operations role, because operations typically can kind of cover lots of different things, but really only if, and at least where it was roll up solid into the, SVP of operations, but it was always a dotted into that chief commercial officer. Because at the end of the day, most of the time, the chief commercial officer owns much of the organization, whether it's at the sales leader level, things of that nature. Because I really believe that in order for enablement to be successful, you need to be at that level, have that seat at the table, and be able to say, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, here's the benefit to you, here's our strategy, as opposed to, as we kind of talked about before, just the doer of things. Go do that training because my team can't forecast properly. Go do that training because they're not asking good questions. The level in the organization, in order to get that autonomy, that support. I wholeheartedly agree to Nick's response, Del, is CRO, operations, someone at that level. And depending on the organization, whether it's sales enablement, customer enablement, those two for me, I believe are the kind of the best ways to go. I've had people who've been under learning and development, and that's okay too. But again, I personally see enablement as the hub of working with all of those organizations. So you need to be aligned at the place in the organization where you're going to have that kind of bridge. So I know that was a super long-winded. Nick did a much better job of being succinct
No,
on that one, Del.
expanded.
Anything to add on that one?
I think it's funny, Nick, just to jump in, is like every time I think we go to respond, we're like, but everything is so complex, similar to like, well,
yeah,
where do you report into? I personally, like, my boss is the chief commercial officer. You know, I guess I do think of it in, again, with sometimes, you know, organizations and semantics, or, you know, how far along they've come to optimizing their own, you know, customer engagement and revenue streams. Are they blending marketing and sales? Are they blending, you know, the customer? Where does it fit? And I do think, you know, is the highest up, go there, right?
Go there.
Attached to the end-to-end revenue. Like if the organization isn't there yet, be thinking about it in terms of that. You know,
Correct.
that's where enablement's really going to have the biggest impact.
Yeah. And even if you don't report up in there, I don't know about
dotted line yourself.
Yeah, you dotted line yourself. And even if you're not aligned from an org structure perspective, I have monthly and quarterly meetings with the heads of those organizations, regardless of where I would roll up into. It would be with the chief marketing officer. What's our strategy? What's the roadmap? What's going on? If you have product marketing, customer service, whatever those heads are. I mean, again, ideally getting aligned at that level makes your job a little bit easier. But at the end of the day, regardless, you still want to have those updates. Well, what are you doing and what are you working on? And how does that, you know, how do we all align? How do we all not reinvent? So if you're a part of an organization where you don't feel like you're aligned properly, I would recommend that you just go out and start meetings. And I've done it before. I'd be like, hey, I just really want, 15 minutes just to make sure that we're aligned on strategy. What are your goals? What are the things that you're looking for? And how can we support you? 9 times out of 10, you will get a quick response because everybody wants that level of support. So it opens up the door to have that conversation and to be strategic. And I will, also throw in, and I think we're going to talk about this, and maybe it's a great question on metrics. But I'm also looking at time, and also based on some other conversations that we're going to be having. We are going to have a full session. I don't know if it's session 2 or session 3 on metrics. So maybe, I think it's session 3. And that is a great question, because what I will say from a metrics perspective, if you align to a business strategy, if you align to a business issue that you're trying to solve, metrics is much, much easier, easier, because you can tie a business issue. Here's a program. Here's what the result was. I'm oversimplifying. I'm looking at Nick's face like, well, I don't know about that. But, it becomes that much easier if you define the strategy properly. And if you're really aligned to the revenue and business goals, then metrics become that much easier. So I hate to table something. I hate that.
I would totally agree. And again, sort of we outlined the structure for this 3-part series, and wanted to really start with strategy and frameworks and thinking about it. And we're gonna sort of really have a dedicated session to metrics at the end. But I think to Susan's point, like, don't come up with metrics all on your own. Like, oh, here's our metric. Align to business objectives. And again, the ones that from that initial mapping priority, where you can have the biggest impact and you can actually have measurement, right? It's not arbitrary. It's not like, think I could do this. Like, if you can't actually have concrete evidence to demonstrate what you set as your benchmark, and based on certain tactics and efforts, it's just going to be a real struggle to continue to have that validity of, well, what were you guys doing? How did you really influence this?
Correct. Exactly.
And I think around the metric, or around the KPIs, when we get to session 3, we might have a takeaway, download, leave behind document as well that could line out, your leading and lagging indicators, pools of indicators that you could review, look at. But at the end of the day, it starts with the questions that you're asking of those stakeholders of what needs to be measured based on what they're measured on.
Correct.
If you're having this conversation about measuring this over here with this particular one leader and not looking at the organization as a whole, you get back to that land of broken things, reactive rather than proactive approach. So huge topic, and hence why we're going to have one session dedicated in March to this.
Yeah, very excited about that. We were all like, let's jump in with that. And Melinda, this is a great question. And again, I'm just looking at time, and I want to be kind of thoughtful about it, especially those people that are in Europe, which is like the end of the day for you guys. So after, and Renee, I'll start with you on this one. After the alignment and strategy, where are we seeing, best practices to have enablement used by the organization? That's a great question.
I love the question. And there's a couple of different things to do in a real simple level of, have meetings, talk and engage with people, right? And make sure you have a seat at the table in all of the key, business meetings that are taking shape, where you're learning, listening, and you're also presenting back your own insights. It doesn't have to be long. In fact, right, we don't want to bore people. 5 to 10 minutes, right, of the key things that are happening. But, what's also really helpful is communicating back as far across and as far down the organization as you can.
Correct.
So much time, everything happens again in certain silos and maybe gets communicated at the executive level. But sometimes the people, lower down, are like, oh, I didn't know that. The more you can really help disseminate critical information, feedback from customers. If you've got a voice of the customer program, be engaged with it, take it in, talk to the customers. I have one-on-ones with various account managers and sales reps all the time, because everyone acts differently, everyone learns differently. And so, not just by saying, here's, our PowerPoint update, whatever it might be, the more in tune you are to the pulse of the organization and the real life needs of the strategy, of the executives, and of the team members, you're really going to have a consistent seat. And, that people knocking at your door.
Correct. I totally agree. I have kind of 3 tactical things that at least have been really good from at least from my experience. One is I've set up multiple times what I call a sales enablement or an enablement council, and going out to the sales leader saying, I want 1 or 2 of your team members who can be our eyes and ears from an enablement perspective. So we meet on a monthly basis, and that is, Renee, we were talking about the strategy, and Nick, when you were talking about the presentation, it is, okay, here's what we're planning, here's what we're doing, here's, what the content, here's the reasons why, and getting that feedback. And then I use them also as a, hey, review this document and make sure that, I don't know, it has the right lens and feel. So something like an enablement council, which is made up of managers and individual account reps, is a great way to get information. And they also provide, hey, we're struggling with these customers. Hey, we're struggling with, this messaging. Hey, we're struggling with X. So it really becomes a good communication mechanism. And then the second thing, at least that I introduced that was really super helpful within the organization, is a sales leader monthly meeting from an update perspective. And it wasn't just all enablement. There was some from the CCO, there were some from enablement, there were some other pieces, but that is a great way to align, the strategy, the planning, things like that from an enablement perspective to the sales leaders. I don't know, Renee or Nick or others on the call if they have this, but man, oh man, if you can get the frontline managers bought into anything that you are doing, it makes your life that much easier. So doing like an enablement council and or this manager meeting, I've actually been able to get programs through, and I've said, oh, well, I went to the enablement council and they all said that they wanted to do A, B, and C. Well, okay. All right. If you heard it from my team, I will be way more enthusiastic about jumping on the bandwagon. So That's just tactical from me. And Nick, I wanted to see what other else great tips I can get from you guys as well.
Sure. Well, what you both mentioned, fantastic, and what Renee was saying about who we're meeting. Something that I typically do, and sometimes it doesn't happen, but on at least a weekly basis, I look at the week ahead is who is someone in the organization I've not spoken with, who's someone new I need to meet and schedule 30 minutes with them. And I try to do that. It's not formalized per se or programatized or whatever, but just something that I do is, okay, looking at the organization, and it could be a first line leader on the other side of the globe. It could be an individual contributor. It could be some, the sales ops person supporting one. It's not just focused on sales, but some of the organization, just to meet someone new and ask just a series of questions, just to get to know them a little bit better, how they support. So exactly what you said, Susan, through the council, which I'm a full supporter of doing sales enablement or field councils, is taking those insights. Well, I heard from a rep in France, or heard from someone in Brazil, and it seems like this is an overwhelming challenge. And when I talk to the sales leaders, are you getting this as well? Do you hear from your people that this is an ongoing issue or an opportunity or whatever the case may be? But you get the groundswell from the upward pressure coupled with the downward pressure. And then who meets in the middle? Number two, what I will mention, the first line leaders. Yes. And so this is not, I would say a best practice and even a difficult thing to do, but focusing on your investments as an enablement team of 1 or 10 on the critical audience of first line leaders. They're typically the most underinvested in individuals in the sales organization. I would argue have one of, if not the hardest job in sales because of what I just said. They have the upward pressure of their team, the downward pressure from senior leadership, and who's stuck in the middle, oftentimes not prepared or well invested in for that role to make that jump from, let's say, successful sales rep, as we all know, to a first line leader. Yeah. Not only to be a people leader and get those skills, but a sales people leader, which is another beast all on its own. So whatever you can do, and I would just take a programmatic look at the services that you provide, whether it's sales tools training, of course, methodology training, business acumen training, industry knowledge, product training, whatever it is. And how do I help those force multipliers of the sales leader, the first line leaders, be more successful in their role through the programs that I provide currently, or the programs I will provide to the organization and service I'll provide in the future. If you don't have your first line leaders on board with what you're doing, exactly what Susan said about the Enablement Council and getting things through, then I would start on Monday and start taking a good hard look at what service you're providing and how you can make those first line leaders successful through the programs and services that you provide. Force multipliers can really be a good partner, excellent partner in my opinion, but also help you yield the results you're looking to achieve for the organization and the sales organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Good Lord, we could spend a whole hour on that. I wholeheartedly agree. Get those frontline managers. That will be the big key to your success. And again, just looking at time, I want to be very, very respectful of people throughout their day. So really a last kind of roundup of all the things that we've talked about. And Renee, I'll start with you on this one. But from your perspective, what do you want as just a key recommendation or kind of a key takeaway for this group from your perspective?
From my perspective, I'm a real big picture kind of strategy thinker, but would really love to know, again, this is a series, like, what are the key questions? What are some of the big problems? And to be able to really start to understand, where are we going after, the last 2 years is just, everything to me is so different. I just had a new team of sales members join in January, and everything we had in infrastructure, right, needs to be different now. And so I just think, from recommendations, it's how do you think about those big picture strategies, but how do you really think about it where you can have the most impact right now, given we are in really changing, in evolving times where all companies are trying to maintain and still grow. So I think we have a lot of unique and really interesting, enablement practices that we can be thinking about in developing some new things. So yeah.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. All right. What about a key takeaway from folks? Nick, what's a key takeaway that you want this group of participants to take away?
if you're not doing this right now, as I mentioned about first line leaders and supporting them and what services you're providing, do this also on Monday. If you're not doing this right now, is be an incredible student of your organization. What I mean by that is, beyond the conversations and the learnings from these conversations and meetings you're part of and sitting on weekly meetings or monthly meetings, all that is understand the business drivers at a very data-driven detail. Yeah. And what I mean by that is, it's one thing to know, okay, our target for this year is X, right? And that's our guiding, that's the outcome, right? But what needs to lead in, what needs to back into that to achieve that number? Sales velocity, pipeline factor, what's been the success rate of your SDRs from a metrics perspective. Again, we're going to talk about measurement later, but that's what we're aligned to.
Oh no.
Froze again.
I know.
And I was expecting one of us to have the weather influenced impact to freezing.
I know.
All
right.
I apologize.
No, that's okay. Nick's back. All right. Fantastic.
Yeah. We'll talk, I think, a little bit more about that on in session 3, but I'll stop there.
Absolutely. All right. And I know that we are up on time. Really wanted to thank Renee, Nick, all the participants for some really, really great questions. Again, join us for our next few sessions that are coming up, really all around strategy. And as I said, and I put it in here for Dell, happy to connect through LinkedIn, through the Sales Enablement Collective. If anybody has any particular questions, really would be happy to help and utilize whatever experience that we have. So I thank the panelists. I thank the team. Thank you guys so much for your participation. Maria, I'm not exactly sure when the next session is. I don't remember off the top of my head. I believe
I think they're last Fridays of the month.
The last Friday of the month.
Last Friday in February, in March. Yeah. I don't know how it works, but ask us questions beforehand. We can come prepared.
Absolutely.
February
Happy
25th.
to do that.
Yeah. February 25th and March the 25th.
Great. Fantastic. All right. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, your evening. Renee, good luck in the snowstorm.
You too. Yes, for all of us on the East Coast, be safe this weekend.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Bye. Ciao. Bye-bye.
Bye.